Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on policy development for visitable housing. My name is Alan Mankiewicz. I'm the communications coordinator at the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies, and I'll be the moderator for our webinar today. I'll just give you some information about the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies. It's a not-for-profit, consumer-directed, and university-affiliated national organization dedicated to research, education, and knowledge dissemination on issues facing people with disabilities. We strive for full and equal participation of people with disabilities in all aspects of our society. The VisitAbility project is a 3-year national initiative of the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies. It started in May 2013 and will run until March 2016. The overall goal of the project is to promote visitable housing in Canada, and the objectives of the project are to increase understanding of visitable housing in terms of current policies and practices, impacts, barriers, and best practices, to increase the awareness of visitable housing, and to develop and implement strategies to promote visitable housing. Visitable housing, or VisitAbility, is the concept of designing and building homes with basic accessibility. Visitable housing offers a convenient home for residents and a welcoming environment for visitors of all ages and mobility. Visitable homes have 3 basic accessibility features: a no-step entrance at the front, back, or side of the house, wider doorways and clear passages on the main floor, and a main floor bathroom or powder room that can be accessed by visitors who use mobility devices. I'll just give you a brief description of our webinar today and the format. The target audience are municipal policymakers and other interested stakeholders. The objective is to learn about policies related to visitable housing in terms of policies in Canada and the USA, the policy development processes, challenges in policy development, strategies to address challenges, and policy outcomes and impacts. The length of the webinar will be approximately 2 hours. In terms of the format, we'll have 3 panel presentations, followed by a break, and then a question and answer session with panelists. Just a couple of technical notes. If possible, please use a headphone or earphone rather than a speaker. Your microphones will be muted for all participants. If you have a question, please type it in the question box on the bottom of your control panel on your screen. And then once the question and answer session starts, we will unmute people and ask them to ask their question. The panelists for today are Dwayne Rewniak. He's the Acting Executive Director of Housing Delivery and Land Development for Manitoba Housing. Jason Watt, a Building Policy Engineer from the City of Vancouver. And Clayton Trevillyan, Permit Specialist, City of Tucson, Arizona. So our first presenter will be Dwayne Rewniak from Manitoba Housing. And Dwayne, you may begin when you're ready.
Hold on.
Good morning, everyone. As Al mentioned, my name is Dwayne Rewniak, and I'm the Acting Executive Director for Housing Delivery and Land Development with Manitoba Housing. I'm pleased to be here this morning to present on policy development for visitable housing, sharing a bit about the Manitoba housing experience. As far as my presentation outline goes for this morning, I'd like to talk a little bit about policy development from a Manitoba housing perspective in relation to visitable housing. Go into the design features, so what Manitoba Housing considers to be a visitable home. Talk about some of our programs and initiatives relating to visitable housing. Talk a bit about the benefits and challenges. And then the second half of my presentation will focus on our Manitoba Housing's flagship visitable project, the Bridgewater neighborhood. And as part of the Bridgewater neighborhood, I'll talk a little bit about the vision, goals, and objectives. talk about visible housing aspect of the Bridgewater neighborhood, talk about costs, both a builder and a developer perspective, and then conclude with providing a update on how visitable housing is currently progressing in the Bridgewater neighborhood. And Alan mentioned as part of his introduction the visible housing study that's currently going on across Canada. Bridgewater was a case study that was looked at as part of this particular project. So starting with visible design policy, Manitoba Housing is encouraging the use of visible design via a visible design policy that was approved by our board of directors. Through this policy, Manitoba Housing is promoting visible housing through various departmental programs and initiatives, which I will go into a little bit more detail on in a couple of slides that will follow. Manitoba Housing has made an effort to support visitable housing options in its existing housing portfolio, as well as the private market. An accessible and visitable housing guidelines for residential units was created back in 2010. What this housing guideline document does, it addresses accessibility requirements for the design and construction of both new residential units, as well as upgrading or renovating existing residential dwellings and their exterior environments. And finally, Manitoba Housing is encouraging the use of the guidelines in the private market or private sector by making them available to community stakeholders. Now, what do we mean when we say visitable housing? Now, similar to Alan's definition at the start, a visitable home is a residence incorporating a minimum visible design features that include a level no-step entrance that's a minimum 36 inches wide on an accessible route, and particularly at the front entrance. It includes wider doorways and hallways with a minimum of 32 inches clear passage throughout, and a wheelchair accessible bathroom on the main floor with a 5-foot turning radius. So these are mandatory visible housing features that we require. There's also additional features such as the lower light switches, the raised electrical outlets, grab bar installations. However, those are just volunteer, I guess, requirements from a visitable housing perspective. The mandatory are the 3 items that I've just mentioned. And this is just to give you an example of a visitable home on the left of the screen with the no-step entrance compared to non-visitable with numerous steps required to get up to the front entry of the home. So moving on to talk a bit about some of the programs and initiatives that Manitoba Housing currently has in place in regards to visitable housing. We currently have a goal to renovate 10% of our housing units to accessibility standards when performing major renovations to our own properties. So Manitoba Housing has a total of about 13,000, a little over 13,000 housing units throughout the province that are owned by Manitoba Housing and direct managed. And we have to date converted about 75 of our direct managed units to visitable accessible standards as a result of this policy. Also, any new residential construction that's funded with public contributions promote the use of visitable design. And we've constructed a total of 884 visitable units from between 2007 to 2013. And a large portion of these units will be part of our 1,500 new affordable and social housing commitment that we recently completed committing back in March 31st of 2014, so earlier this year. So what this does is essentially any time that we release a request for proposals that has, say, a seniors housing component, as part of the evaluation criteria, proponents will be expected to allocate a certain percentage of their housing units towards visitability and accessible design. Manitoba Housing has also introduced a residential adaptations for disabilities program that basically assists eligible households to undertake adaptations to their homes. So why is Manitoba Housing doing this? Talk a bit about some of the benefits of visible housing. Certainly visible housing provides easier access for everyone, whether it be aging parents, families with children, persons with mobility issues. Having that no-step entrance certainly provides easier access for everyone, getting into the home. Visitable housing provides an opportunity to age in place. So it allows residents to live in their homes longer without having to undertake expensive renovations and modifications, as they grow older. With the visitable home, a lot of these adaptations are done at the onset. So you have your no-step entrance, the wider doorways and hallways, the wheelchair accessible washroom on the main floor. These are modifications that do not have to take place after the fact and directly feed into my third benefit, which is economic sustainability. So it basically, you're reducing costs associated with home renovations that have to be done after the fact. Visitable housing provides a safer household for environments, as no steps reduce stair-related injuries. And there's an aesthetic appeal with the spacious, open concept design of a visitable home. Some of the challenges, certainly there's unfamiliarity and skepticism towards visitable housing. I know that a lot of the feedback that we initially received, particularly when I'll be talking about the Bridgewater housing project a little later in the presentation, is the common comment was, I don't have a mobility issue, I'm not in a wheelchair, why would I require a visitable home? So there's certainly a lot of education that's required to inform people of the benefits of a visitable house, that they're essentially provide easier access for everyone. Certainly there's initial resistance from builders to construct visitable homes. This is something that we came across with industry here in Manitoba, and certainly had to do a lot of consultation sessions to provide information on visitable housing, the benefits of visitable homes, and basically giving them a better sense of what we were talking about, and that they're providing easier access for all. So most of the construction challenges as far as a visitable home is related to the no-step entrance, and that's where the largest portion of cost, I guess, added cost to a builder would be. It would be in providing that no-step entrance at the front. Of course, drainage issues must be adequately addressed, given the fact that you're building up for the front entry point, and drainage is something that has to be looked at in order to ensure that all the municipal drainage requirements are met. And home builders are required to develop revised building plans and apply new building techniques, so that could be seen as a challenge as well. So now I want to move into the second half of my presentation and talk a bit more about the Bridgewater neighborhood. As I mentioned, the Bridgewater neighborhood was used as a case study for the Visitable Housing in Canada study that's currently being undertaken by the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies. And the Bridgewater neighborhood is one that has incorporated visitable housing as one of its key features. When the Bridgewater neighborhood is complete, it will include over 1,000 visitable homes and hundreds of multifamily units with visitable housing features. Presently, there are about 200 visitable homes that have been built and are occupied in the Bridgewater neighborhood. This would make Bridgewater one of the first new developments in North America to feature such a large proportion of visitable housing. Now, just to give you a little bit of background on the Bridgewater neighborhood, Manitoba Housing acquired over 1,000 acres of land in southwest Winnipeg way back in the 1970s to land bank for affordable housing purposes. And in the early 2000s, there was a land supply shortage identified in this particular area of the city. And as a result, the Manitoba Housing, along with a private developer called Ladco, approached the city of Winnipeg to receive approval to develop this area in southwest Winnipeg for new homes. Manitoba Housing now owns approximately 1,400 acres of land in this area, and we're actively developing 3 residential neighborhoods in a town center. The Bridgewater neighborhood is projected to be a 20 to 25-year project, and Manitoba Housing is now in its 7th year of development, and we're currently about 5 years ahead of schedule. And this essentially has to do with market conditions. So over the past couple of years, the Winnipeg market has performed very well as far as single-family starts are concerned. Bridgewater has led the city of Winnipeg as far as residential building permits for about 4 straight years. So it's a very popular area of the city for new housing development, and we're seeing that as far as the number of building permits that are being taken out and housing starts that are being constructed in this area on an annual basis. And once complete, the Bridgewater lands, including the privately developed lands that I mentioned as well, so there's 3,000 acres in total, and once these 3,000 acres are developed, it will provide more than 15,000 new housing units and add about 40,000 people to the area at completion. So I also want to make it clear that with respect to the Bridgewater development, it is a development that is owned and the development is being undertaken by Manitoba Housing. So this is a public sector initiative. Manitoba Housing is a crown corporation of the government of Manitoba and is part of the Department of Housing and Community Development. So the area that I'm talking about as far as this presentation is concerned and the development that's occurring in Bridgewater is a public sector initiative that's in which Manitoba Housing is acting as developer. We're responsible for servicing the entire neighborhood, putting in the infrastructure, and then selling lots to our designated builders. The map that you're seeing now is just a land use plan for the Bridgewater neighborhood. So it shows the 3 residential neighborhoods that I mentioned. In the northeast or upper right corner, you have Bridgewater Forest. This was our first residential neighborhood that began development in 2006. To the left, we have our northwest neighborhood, Bridgewater Lakes. This is the 2nd residential neighborhood in Bridgewater and began development in 2010. This is a neighborhood where you'll see currently the highest proportion of visitable housing units in this particular neighborhood. And to the southwest, or in the lower left-hand corner, you have Bridgewater Trails. And Bridgewater Trails is the 3rd residential neighborhood that Manitoba Housing is developing as part of this neighborhood. Right in the center, you have our town center called Bridgewater Center. This is intended to be a mixed-use area that has a combination of residential units. There'll be up to 1,000 multifamily units developed as part of the town center. Includes commercial, retail, office space. So it's essentially designed to be a mixed-use hub at the center of the neighborhood, designed for residents to access those services. So I want to talk very briefly about some of the vision and goals and objectives of Manitoba Housing and the province of Manitoba when undertaking the development of this neighborhood. So the goal was to create not only a new housing development, but a new kind of neighborhood. And our vision included housing diversity. So we wanted to see a lot of different types of housing developed as part of the neighborhood. We wanted to see a combination of not only single-family homes, but multifamily units that took the form of apartment condominiums, row house condominiums, rental apartments. We wanted to see higher densities being achieved in this neighborhood, so you have smaller lot sizes, you have different types of lots. We wanted to create a very walkable neighborhood and one that was easily accessible. So the goals and objectives that came about as a result of this vision was a healthy living, promoting diversity, and incorporating homes with design features that made them more accessible. And this is where the visitable housing component got its start in the Bridgewater neighborhood. And I should also mention that public input guided the development of a framework that became the neighborhood's overall vision. A lot of planning and consultation went into the development of the Bridgewater neighborhood. Numerous open houses were held, public hearings. There was a design charrette that was held at the University of Manitoba back in the early 2000s that basically brought in industry professionals to provide their input as far as what they would like to see the neighborhood developed as. And I can recall certainly during that charrette, as I was a part of it, that one of the things that were looked at was wanting to create a more accessible neighborhood, and particularly looking at visitable housing being incorporated as part of the development of that neighborhood. So in order to incorporate visitable housing on a large scale, Manitoba Housing undertook a number of items, some of which I previously mentioned. So there were extensive consultations with building and development professionals. Now, certainly one of the things that we did at the onset was involve the Manitoba Home Builders Association, which is the local home building industry and representatives in Manitoba. A consultation was held with that group to basically provide them with information on visitable housing, what it was all about and what our intentions were for developing visitable within the Bridgewater neighborhood. We hired a consultant to research the costs of visitable housing, just to give us a sense of how much of an additional cost building a visitable home was compared to a non-visitable home. And this is something I'll get into a bit more detail a little bit later in the presentation. We conducted focus groups to examine consumer responses to visitable housing, and an aggressive marketing campaign was undertaken to inform the public about visitable housing. And this next slide is just to show an example of the promotion, one of the promotion, I guess, mechanisms we undertook. You can see from the title, easy to access, easy to love. So playing off that easy to access for all. I also want to make it clear that visitable housing was not something that happened overnight in the Bridgewater neighborhood. It was certainly gradually integrated into the development. Our starting point was we released a request for proposals back in 2008 for the first residential neighborhood, Bridgewater Forest. As a result of that RFP being released, we received no responses at the onset. So it was definitely a slow response. We did end up getting a builder contact us after the fact, and the first visitable show home was constructed in Bridgewater Forest in 2008. Since then, we had additional builders agree to construct visitable show homes in 2010. Show homes were very useful because the show homes are open year-round, so they enable home buying customers to come in, see what a visitable home is all about. And then in Bridgewater Forest Phase 2, we decided to undertake a bit more of an aggressive strategy. We identified 14 lots on a street that were dedicated for visitable housing in order to test and monitor the building and marketing of these types of homes. And then a decision was made in 2010 to incorporate 50% of all lots in Bridgewater Lakes and Bridgewater Trails as visitable. So in Bridgewater Lakes, there'll be over 1,000 single-family homes being developed, of which 600 will be visitable homes. And this is just an example of what a visitable show home looks like in the Bridgewater neighborhood. So this map is an important one because it shows what our projections are for visitable housing throughout the Bridgewater neighborhood. You can see in Bridgewater Forest on the upper right-hand side of the map, a slow integration. The larger parcels in red that you will see identify are multifamily units where there's a visitable or accessible component. You can see kind of in the middle of the map, surrounded by green space, there's two strips of red. That represents that pilot project that I mentioned in the previous slide, those 14 units that were dedicated to visitable housing. And then you can see in the Bridgewater Lakes and Bridgewater Trails neighborhoods, and the neighborhood's almost completely highlighted in red. So that represents, anywhere in red represents where you'll find a visitable home in Bridgewater. So with respect to costs, in particular builder costs, they're relatively minor when done during initial construction. As I mentioned, we hired a visitable design consultant in 2007 to perform a cost analysis on visitable housing, and the analysis concluded that the interior costs are negligible if planned at the onset. There were certainly additional costs identified related to the no-step entry, and that visitable homes built in isolation without any pre-planning are the most expensive option. So talking specifically about the Bridgewater neighborhood and some of developer costs, in Bridgewater, visitable houses are primarily two types. There's the non-walkout or lookout design. So these would be kind of your standard lots, and then we have the walkout lookout design. And by walkout, I mean these would be homes with where a basement that's at grade level, and a lookout would mean homes with larger windows in with respect to the basement foundation, where part of the window is at or above grade. So in Bridgewater, the lots are pre-engineered to accommodate a no-step entrance and drain to a pathway at the rear yard. One of the initial challenges that we recognized there was an added cost for that no-step entrance. So we had our engineers essentially design the lot grade to accommodate that no-step entrance to make it easier for our builders to build a home with a no-step front entry. And that's how we came about with that 50% designation in both Bridgewater Lakes and Bridgewater Trails that I mentioned. So some of the contributing factors to increased development costs of a visitable lot include building up the roadway, the rear pathway and drainage system that I talked about, and deeper service lines with respect to water and sewer. So one of the things that we found out early on is that with respect to basement developments, builders and home buying customers want basements with 8-foot, 9-foot ceilings, and as a result, that requires the service lines to be lowered a bit deeper into the ground. And our engineering consultants estimate that the added cost of providing a visitable lot in Bridgewater is approximately $2,700 per lot. And this is just a depiction of what what our visitable lots on rear pathways look like. So essentially, these visitable homes are backing onto a pathway that kind of fits in with our walkability notion of the neighborhood, provided with developer-provided wrought iron fencing, and essentially provides a bit of a buffer from your neighbor. So in most homes, you're backing right onto a neighbor at the rear of the home. Here you have a nice pathway in between. Finally, just want to quickly provide a little bit of an update on where we are as far as visitable in the Bridgewater neighborhood. In Bridgewater Forest, we have close to 40 single-family visitable homes that are currently constructed in the neighborhood, and we've got over 200 units of multifamily housing that will be built to the visitable standard. In Bridgewater Lakes, excuse me, in Bridgewater Lakes, we have approximately half of the 1,190 single-family homes will be visitable once that neighborhood is completed. So, and I mentioned that we have currently about 200 units that are constructed in visitable housing units that are constructed in the neighborhood. Bridgewater Trails is a neighborhood that's just starting development. It was just approved in 2012, and we've just started selling lots in this particular neighborhood, but once it's developed, it will contain 1,040 single-family homes, of which half will be developed to the visitable standard. And finally, in the Bridgewater Center, we have there are residential land uses within the town center that will be developed to incorporate visitable housing. I think I mentioned earlier that there'll be 1,000 multifamily units in total once the town center is complete, and there's also a strong desire to develop the area as a fully accessible neighborhood. So I guess before I conclude, I'll just say that we're still at the early onset as far as the Bridgewater development. It started in 2007. We're only about 7 years in, so the visible housing component is currently small, but certainly as the neighborhood continues to develop and we continue to construct more of these types of visitable homes, you'll start to see those numbers increase to the point where when the neighborhood's at full completion, there'll be thousands of visitable housing units as part of the neighborhood, both from a single family and a multifamily perspective. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dwayne. We'll just remind everyone that if they have a question for Dwayne, please type it in the question box on your screen, and we'll address them during our question and answer period. Our next presenter will be Jason Watt from the City of Vancouver. We're just going to switch over the screen to Jason. Jason, you may begin when you're ready.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jason Watt. I'm a building policy engineer with the City of Vancouver. With regards to the adaptable / visitable housing requirements that are going to be included in the 2014 Vancouver Building Bylaw, scheduled to be released on January the 1st, 2015, I should point out that I've only been with the city for about a year, and the people that worked on the development of these policies that are going to be soon coming into effect have basically all moved on. There's been quite a bit of high turnover here.
If I could put in, sorry. If you have a presentation, can you put it on the screen?
It is on the screen.
Oh, okay. We can't see it for some reason.
Okay.
Sorry, just give us 1 second here.
Okay. Oh, I guess I have to click show my screen.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. There we go.
Sorry about that.
See it now?
Yeah, thank you. You can go ahead. Sorry about that.
Okay. So yes, I'm going to be going over the 2014 Vancouver bylaw will contain provisions for visitable/adaptable housing is what we call it, but I was just mentioning that I've only been with the city for about a year, and the people that were involved in the development of these policies have basically they've all moved on. We've had a high turnover here, but so I might not be familiar with all of the history, but I'll try and go through this the best I can for you. Okay, so the Vancouver, the 2014 Vancouver bylaw contains a number of new requirements that are unique to Vancouver, and one of them is the adaptable housing provisions, which I'll be going through. This is what the cover of the new 2014 Vancouver bylaw looks like. It reflects City Council's objectives to be the greenest city, an accessible city, and have adaptable housing for seniors and visitors, and also to be a safe city. These provisions, although they're not in print yet, are online, and there's some links here where you can find the new requirements that will be in the 2014 bylaw. So Section 385, the new 2014 bylaw, is where the new adaptable housing provisions will be contained. It'll basically apply to all new, just new, not existing dwelling units, except for single-room accommodation. The bylaw did go through over 2 years of public consultation, and the intent of the adaptable housing is to allow people to age in their homes easily, make minor modifications so that they'll be able to age in their homes, and it's also intended for visitors. Now, I did notice your definition of visitable housing, or the one that was presented earlier, talks about having a level entrance to the dwelling unit. Now, I've looked through some old records here, and I know that was discussed, but City Council decided not to go that far with the adaptable housing provisions. It could potentially happen in the future, but it's not going to happen now. I guess Vancouver is a very hilly place, and maybe it was determined that it would have been too onerous to do that, so they've just decided, at least for now, just to make the houses themselves adaptable, but not have a level entrance. There will be, one of the requirements is to have a accessible bathroom on the main floor, and also to have wider doors and quarters, and I'll get into that in a bit. So as I mentioned, the adaptable housing provisions are basically applicable to all new residential construction, except for the single room accommodation. That's typically the low-income housing that's found in East Vancouver, but it applies to everything else, and it will be mandatory that the provisions are met. It applies both to Part 9 and Part 3 buildings. Part 9 refers you back to Part 3, so whether the building's under Part 9 provisions or Part 3 provisions, all dwelling units have to meet these requirements. So just to go through some of the requirements, I'll go through them fairly quickly. We do require at least one door to be wider at the entrance to the dwelling unit. We'll require 2 peepholes at the main entry door, one higher and one lower, so that somebody who's in a wheelchair can also see who's at the door. Alternatively, you could have a side light or an intercom system or some other way that somebody in a wheelchair is able to determine who's at the front door. Thresholds within the dwelling unit can't be over 13 millimeters, which is approximately ½ an inch. And lever-type door hardware is required throughout the dwelling unit. Doorways within dwelling units are going to have to be wider at 800 millimeters. They'll also require lever-type handles. Thresholds within the dwelling unit can't be more than 13 millimeters, ½ an inch. Corridors are required to be wider at 900 millimeters. And except for laneway houses, at least one stair within the dwelling unit is required to have a width of 915 millimeters. And that's to accommodate the future installation of a barrier-free lift. We'll require a lower waste pipe below the sink in the kitchen, and that's so that somebody can more easily lower their sink in the future if somebody in a wheelchair wants to have a lower sink. Bathrooms. The faucets will have to be offset into the tub and the shower so that somebody doesn't have to reach too far in to operate them. Again, the wash basin will require lever-type faucets. And one bathroom within the dwelling unit is required to be designed to allow for the future installation of a barrier-free shower without substantial modifications. That'll require a second drain and concrete construction located under the tub. And in wood construction, it'll require the doubling up of floor joists so that a shower can easily be put in the future if somebody wants to. And one bathroom is required to have a larger floor space of 750 millimeters by 1200 millimeters in front of the wash basin, toilet, bathtub, or shower so that somebody in a wheelchair can easily move around. There's a requirement for reinforcement for the future installation of grab bars. We're not requiring the grab bars be installed now, but we want the reinforcing there so that if somebody wants to put them in the future, they can easily do so. Now, the bathroom on the main floor, all dwelling units require a larger bathroom. However, in a multi-level dwelling unit, this table tells you what size of, or you do require a barrier-free bathroom on the main floor of the dwelling unit, and this table tells you basically what you're going to require in that dwelling unit. This is one of the more, I guess, controversial changes to the 2014 Vancouver bylaw. We've given a number of presentations on it, and although this did go through public consultation, designers and developers are raising concerns that the price per square foot of real estate in Vancouver is very expensive, and a lot of these houses are smaller as well, and they're saying that having the barrier-free washroom right on the main floor along with your living room and your kitchen is going to be quite onerous. So we are looking at providing we're working on this now, but we're looking at allowing to have a washroom that is roughed in for plumbing and it has a floor drain in it so that you could have a handheld shower in there. And it's sort of, I guess, to try not to have such a large bathroom on the main floor of a dwelling unit. There's other provisions for the height of light switches and switches for building services. There's a requirement that we have a windowsill in the living room not more than 800 millimeters above the finished floor, and that's so that somebody in a wheelchair can easily look out the window. And that's it. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, thanks very much. Just a reminder to everyone that we will take questions at the end, so you can type them in the question box and we'll get to them during our question and answer phase. Our final presenter for today is Clayton Trevillyan from Tucson, Arizona, and we're just going to switch control over to Clayton, and he can begin when he's ready.
Super, thank you so much for having me. I'm assuming everybody can hear me okay and see my screen. My name is Clayton Trevillyan. I'm happy to share some information with everyone today. We're here to talk about VisitAbility. Sorry about that. As defined earlier, VisitAbility typically has to do with three primary definitions. We're going to see how that relates to the City of Tucson's inclusive home design ordinance. First, a little about myself. I've been with the City of Tucson for 9 years. I specialize in residential building codes, but I haven't always worked in regulation. I used to build houses, so you could say I have perspective from both sides of the industry in that respect. Today I'm going to be covering these topics. Most of them may be slightly redundant based on what you've heard from the other two presenters, but I appreciate your patience as I move through the material. Hopefully there's going to be something that everybody can benefit from here. I'm going to start with an overview of low-level compliance to accessibility as it relates to the topic of visitability for new homes. And I'll do this by discussing the need for accessibility and where the standards might come from or how we might define them. I'll then cover the adoption of the ordinance as it went through our government system here and which elements of accessibility were included. Then to wrap up, I'll touch on the recommended practices for implementing these ordinances. So first, I'll get in with how this relates to the need for accessibility, whereas the catchphrase goes for today, visitability. Due to our generally warm climate and outdoor-friendly environment, Tucson is a popular destination for retirees. In fact, more than 17% of our community is above the age of 65. And there have been several studies over the past few decades that suggest these figures will continue to rise as time goes on, and we'll see an even greater percentage of our community in that older age bracket. Medical advances can also add to the factor, along with increased access to healthcare services. We've seen quite a bit of talk lately in the news about raising the age of retirement, and that's just because people are living longer and they're working further into their golden years. Although the average lifespan doesn't increase very rapidly over the years, it should be noted that in developed countries such as the United States and Canada, we've seen about a 10-year increase in the average lifespan over the past 50 years. And it's widely accepted that those numbers will continue to rise at a moderate rate. But with older people in the community, we can assume that we'll need additional accessible features. On a national level, it's estimated that about 70% of the population will experience one form of disability or another during their lifetime. This estimate does include temporary disabilities, including broken bones and short-term illnesses that might inhibit a person's mobility, but that number is certainly significant to our topic. These four factors had an impact to the efforts in mandating accessibility in new housing here in Pima County. Many of the proponents of this cause insisted that it was a social responsibility to accommodate the needs of all the citizens, including the elderly and the disabled. This would have a widespread effect if taken into account that these citizens not only needed accessible features in their own homes, but also in the homes of the family and friends with whom they visit. So who benefits from accessible features in housing? Well, to start, it can be stated that not everyone that is disabled uses a wheelchair. And more importantly, more people benefit from accessibility than just those who are disabled. And those who are in the greatest need of accessible features in a home are actually among the least likely to be capable of affording such features. I'd like to touch on these topics because these were some of the primary oppositions to adopting the ordinance here in Pima County. It was argued that the ordinance should not be adopted here because less than 1% of the population is in a wheelchair. Yet the benefits of a visibility ordinance reach far beyond those who are just limited to a wheelchair. Steps can be a roadblock or a barrier to someone in a cane or a walker, so we see that it goes beyond just that. There are literally hundreds of ailments that affect people in the community on a daily basis, many of which go unnoticed when discussing a visibility ordinance. Turning a doorknob may not seem like a very big deal, but to 1 in 5 U.S. adults that have arthritis here in the U.S., it could change their life to have lever-type door handles. Just imagine for a moment having to ask for assistance to get out of a restroom. It could be rather difficult or change your way of life. Or worse yet, having to move out of your home because the doors are too narrow for a wheelchair as you get older and have an unforeseen situation that changes your life. It would be very difficult to estimate how many people actually benefit from accessible features in a home. Many of them are not even disabled themselves. Our society has seen an increase of in-home hospice care and other forms of nursing outside of institutions such as hospitals and nursing homes. This is far more successful when the homes accommodate such care, especially when the person's giving care are just family members instead of registered nurses or other professionals trained to take care of people. And then there's the physically fit and healthy individuals that suffer from temporary disabilities, such as broken bones or an illness or something of that nature. I can personally say that this happens to everybody. In fact, everyone listening probably knows someone. My son is currently in a wheelchair, actually, from an accident. Fortunately, it'll only be for the next few weeks, but he's getting a first-hand look at how this can change a person's daily life, even with the simplest of tasks. On this note, the city of Tucson has become mindful of these needs. We encourage a culture that is based on the philosophy that minor upgrades that are usually a negligible expense can make the world of difference to an elderly person and those people that care for them. At some point, we must accept that the people who benefit from a visibility ordinance are people too. They're not just a statistic. You see that they're both our grandparents and our children. These people are our neighbors and our coworkers. They're returning war veterans and our heroes. No matter where we live, these people are part of our community, and we all benefit from a visibility ordinance. So what makes up a visibility ordinance? My next topic here is about the standards used to determine the minimum level of compliance. There are several national standards currently available for handicap accessibility standards, as listed on here on the slide. Some of them are intended for public buildings and other for federal housing, but each of them has similarities to the others. Some of these aspects are exactly the same, but it's noticeable that none of these standards could actually be strictly adhered to for every new housing situation, because it just simply would not be cost effective, especially for low-income housing or tract building. Based that many of these standards are intended for public spaces, that's because those public spaces have a higher influx of different people passing through them. So we can see a much more strict regulation when we look at these regulations. A visitable home only needs to meet a few portions of these standards, namely a constant path through the space without having to maneuver stairs along the way, and equally important is access to those primary spaces, which means that someone must be capable of opening and passing through doorways. By relying on portions of one of these standards listed above, we enable designers and builders to have a single point of reference to serve as a benchmark. This is why we chose excerpts from the ANSI A117.1 to use in the draft of the ordinance, so that having the standard allows every designer and builder a single point of reference. Although only portions of the standard were used, they're still readily accessible for reference and clarification. Two draft ordinances were originally prepared and presented for approval. Both of these drafts shared 5 underlying principles. The first was a zero-step entry that provides accessible route from the public way throughout the first floor living area. Considering that the majority of houses in Pima County are constructed on a slab-on grade, this is fairly simple to accomplish for us, but it does pose its own challenges when it comes to weather protection for exterior walls and drainage issues and things like that. In other regions that use conventional foundations and wood floor systems, this would be significantly more difficult. We're fortunate in that most of our finished floor elevations are already close to ground level already, so it's a fairly easy element to meet. The next point is minimum door widths that allow a wheelchair to pass through them, and lever type hardware that allows operation without tight grasping of the hand or twisting of the wrist. The third item on our draft ordinance was a 36-inch hallway, which this is probably the easiest one to meet since the building codes require that anyway. And then the fourth item was reinforcing in the bathrooms so that future grab bars could be installed and the reinforcement would already be there. This item tends to be the most labor intensive, but fortunately it doesn't require that grab bars are actually installed. We just need the blocking so that a homeowner in a future date could make it more accessible. And then we do require that receptacles, controls, switches, and so forth are within those acceptable reach ranges so that someone in a wheelchair could reach all of them. There were a number of different exemptions that were proposed in order to allow a builder to not have to comply, and I'll get into a little further which of those elements were approved as an acceptable exemption. The differences between the two primary drafts that were proposed were in 3 topics here that you see: applicability, mandatory features, and the extent of the exemptions available. One draft stated that it should apply to all new residences, but there was a consistent push from the persons opposing the ordinance that it only applied to government-funded housing. So this was included as options in both of the drafts so that our community leaders could review and determine which would have the best effect or impact. Other options between these 2 drafts were having an accessible bathroom on the first floor and or having a bathroom that was sized to accommodate the appropriate turning radius for the bathroom. And there was also considerable debate about the maximum threshold heights for the accessible entry. Other differences between the drafts included whether all elements of the ordinance would be exempted or if only certain elements would be omitted by an appeal. And after months of discussion and deliberation, it was determined that it should apply to all new 1- and 2-family dwellings. So we see our ordinance is widespread. It applies to every single 1-, 2-, and 3-family dwelling that's to be built. And this is mostly because government subsidized housing already had other regulations that it had to meet anyway. So in order for this to be effective, it needed to apply to all homes. An accessible restroom was not included on our ordinance. This is a point of controversy to some proponents of VisitAbility, whether or not there is required to be a restroom on the first floor. We've taken a stance that builders should be allowed to creative freedom regarding the design of their building. It could be said that, you know, designing a home without a restroom on the first floor is actually limiting the builder's own marketability, because You know, someone might not want to purchase a home that doesn't have a restroom on the first floor. But that also being said, someone that buys a home that doesn't have a restroom on the first floor, you could say that they're exercising their civil right to force people to climb stairs. So the idea here is that we're not going to tell builders what to build. We just want to regulate how they build it. And then as far as the exemption, the entire ordinance can be exempted under an appeal basis. If someone files for an appeal, they have to show a significant cost burden. We see this in cases where the home is elevated because of a floodplain or something of that nature, and they're forced to raise the building. In this case, we would not require that strict adherence to the ordinance is maintained. So how did we get here? How did these ideas develop into something that is now widely accepted in our area? Well, I'm not sure who stuck the first figurative shovel in the ground, but this person, Ms. Cameron, gave this presentation to the Board of Supervisors in February 2000. And her presentation titled Enable 2000 struck the hearts of several community leaders, and this is where it really started to gain interest. And that's mostly because she made it a personal issue to the public. She connected these ideas with their own life circumstances. She said that visiting neighbors makes you a part of the community. And the disabled require food to eat, interest to encourage them, transportation, and a decent place to live. And these aren't luxuries, but the deepest part of survival. She explained that many of the disabled were once able-bodied individuals who could walk down the hall to a bedroom or bathroom and took that action for granted. And for many others, just getting older provides enough challenges inside the home where living should not be a challenge. And her words motivated the board to assign staff to the subject. Shortly after the presentation, other groups started gaining steam here. We started to see a lot more activity in the community. And within a year, the City of Tucson also appointed a team to work on the VisitAbility issue also. And by October 2001, a local coalition of supporters presented to the Board of Supervisors to seek action. This was a significant group of organizations. With their combined efforts, they motivated Pima County Board of Supervisors to adopt the Inclusive Home Design Ordinance. And they wound up adopting it just a few months later. Lots of things happened before and in between these events, but this illustrates that it didn't happen overnight. In fact, it came before the Board of Supervisors so many times that people even started to ask why they were talking about it again. But persistence paid off. It required the continued effort of many people and organizations that included Pima County Council of Aging, Professional Caregiver Association, we can see them listed here, even the University of Arizona and Pima Community College. And it's also of significant note that it wasn't until 5 years later, after Pima County adopted it, that the City of Tucson adopted it. So it still took additional effort and work, but they proved that success was an option. I could fill quite a few more slides about every meeting and public forum that it was discussed at, but it really all comes down to communication. The essential element here needed through the entire process, because a voice must be spoken before it is heard and the words must be clear if they're to be understood. Forming coalitions among community members and discussing where the common ground lies, and then communicate that to the leaders that are willing to listen. And you also have to communicate with the building industry and listen to their concerns. Talking to as many people in the community about this is going to be the best way to determine what the overall impact and benefit to the community will be. To quote my director, the most successful way to adopt an ordinance that affects the home builders is to hear their voice. Constituents become far more receptive when they have a seat at the table, and the proposal is more meaningful with public discussion. This is the type of communication that benefits the entire community. The work certainly wasn't done once the ordinance was adopted. The next stage is implementation. It's essential that communication is used throughout this process as well. Informing architectural designers and developers should be the foremost priority. You've got to get them on board. You need to make sure that they understand what those regulations are, so that it doesn't delay their process of obtaining permits. By clearly communicating the new regulations, applicants can anticipate the impact to their proposed projects and prepare construction plans that already comply before they come in. Communication is also essential within the governing municipality itself. Training staff members provides the building community with a range of resources to answer their questions. Once you get everyone talking the same language, then the same answer is being given back to constituents looking for solutions. The ordinance should also be posted, in the most accessible location as possible. Websites, handouts to the public, all of these things where you provide the information of what these specific regulations are, so that it's clearly understood. Multiple analysts were used by several parties before the ordinance was adopted to try and determine what the exact cost would be to meet the VisitAbility ordinance here in Tucson. The estimates ranged from several hundred to a few $1,000s. However, no information has been brought forward to us yet regarding the significant cost burdens that were suggested would be incurred upon the builders to meet the ordinance. I've spoken with quite a few people in our area about the Inclusive Home Design Ordinance, and it's interesting that some of our builders were forward thinkers, as it were, and started incorporating accessible features into their homes years or even decades before the ordinance was adopted. We already had a movement that was interested in building homes in this fashion. But we've also got others that are still reluctant about the cost benefit of a VisitAbility ordinance. Almost every builder prior to the adoption of the ordinance offered options of a VisitAbility home, just like the extra bathroom on the west wing. They offered an option to make the house visitable. So their argument was, well, nobody is purchasing this option, so where's the market? But we can see that people aren't going to buy a home if they're not already in a wheelchair that's visitable. It needs to be there. As far as the cost that this incurs, the chief building official for Pima County released a statement a few years ago in response to a bill proposed to Congress for a wider-reaching mandate of VisitAbility. Other factors such as legal liability, infringement of civil rights, marketability, affordability, all these were concerns that were voiced from the opponents opposing the Pima County ordinance. And these items, they had to be weighed before the community leaders before they could adopt the ordinance. They had to try and determine what the positive and negative impacts were. But at this time, we are not aware of any such negative side effects to the adoption of the Inclusive Home Design Ordinance. Literally thousands. It's estimated over 25,000 homes have been built here in Pima County and City of Tucson that feature VisitAbility elements, and it's widely accepted that our community as a whole is a better place for it. So that concludes my presentation. We do have information about the Inclusive Home Design Ordinance, a commentary about it on the City of Tucson website. These links are kind of lengthy, so I wouldn't expect that everyone could just copy it down. If you have trouble finding it, you can go to tucsonaz.gov under the Planning and Development Services page and look under Building Codes, or you can contact me directly. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction.
Okay, thanks very much for your presentations. At this point in time, we'll take a 5-minute break so you can refill your drink or go to the washroom. If you choose to stay in front of your computer, we'll have a video and some pictures that we'll show you. Visitable homes have a no-step entry, larger doorways and passageways on the main floor, and a larger bathroom on the main floor.
Visitable homes are, from a construction standpoint, they're built with a bunch of what we call on-grade, which means that there's no stairs at the front of the house, nor are there stairs that access from the garage to the house. There's large advantages to that, for that rather, with people that have mobility issues. but also people that would perhaps have concerns about future mobility issues. And the fact that we do have the aging population is going to become a more front of mind concern for more and more buyers as we go forward.
Well, I think that it could appeal to the younger buyers, partly because there's an interest in that group in creating or making ethical choices as far as what they're purchasing. So that extends to the sustainability of reuse and housing stock. It extends to thinking about creating an inclusive neighborhood. For the older buyers, I think there's people there have a better sense in most cases that there could be some mobility challenges in their future. They may be temporarily injured, they may be permanently have some
So let's remind the older
that a visible house will make their life a lot easier.
You know what, your life is easier because, you know, for young families, like you've got a stroller or a bunch of kids or a wagon, I mean, it's just going to be easier to get in and out of the house. You're carrying a bunch of groceries. You're not trucking up and down the steps. You know, just multi-generational families. And even if you're thinking about you want to stay in your home longer, like you don't want to move when you're 70 because you can't negotiate the stairs anymore. You want to stay in your house as long as possible. And it's just one of those things, it's just a no-brainer. You should absolutely do it.
And not to be scared of it. There's nothing, you don't walk into our house and go, oh my, people in wheelchairs live here. It's just, it's a house and it works, and like we don't even think about it most of the time. It's just everything's so much easier and it's a lot more flexible.
We wanted a house that we could stay in, you know, and not as long as possible, and maybe, you know, not move when we're, you know, say 60, 70, just because we can't go up and down the stairs. Or if one of us gets injured again, building a house that had visitable features already designed into it, it just made a lot more sense.
Hi everyone, welcome back. We're going to begin our question and answer period now. As I mentioned, we'll address the questions that were typed into our question pane, and we'll unmute people to give them the opportunity to ask their question. First question was from Terry Petcow, so we'll unmute Terry and let them ask the question that they had. Go ahead when you're ready, Terry.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. To Dwayne, I was just mainly asking in terms of the opportunity around affordable housing, was there anything built into the design of the Bridgewater neighborhood that included affordable housing, and if so, was there any affordable home ownership, and was there a visibility requirement built into that too?
Sure. The Bridgewater development is being developed like any private sector development, so there has not been an affordable housing component to date incorporated into the neighborhood. But what Manitoba Housing does is we take all of the proceeds that are derived from selling lots in Bridgewater, and then we have what we call a housing development and rehabilitation fund. And then the money that's in that fund is used to support other areas of need, throughout the province. So there hasn't been an affordable housing component to date. That could change. We have certainly have some opportunities particularly along the multifamily side. In Bridgewater Trails, the third residential neighborhood that I mentioned, there is a significant multifamily component, and there certainly is an opportunity to construct some rental housing units that would be a combination of market and non-market rents.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Dwayne. Thanks, Terry. Our next question will be from Chris Rootsart. Go ahead when you're ready, Chris.
Hi, Dwayne. I just had a quick question.
Can you speak up a little bit, please, Chris?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, you're just a little faint.
Sorry. So, Dwayne, just a quick question for Manitoba Housing. Just curious, with the 36-inch doors mentioned in your standards, I'm just wondering why the reduction to 32-inch hallways in the standards.
We're essentially incorporated with input through we have a couple of primary architects that are responsible for design in Bridgewater. One is Architecture 49. They're commonly referred to as Smith-Carter Architects, and Nadi Design. So those are the standards that have been incorporated. My sense is when we're talking hallways, overwhelming majority of builders are constructing hallways that are wider than that 32 inches. But that's without having to, I'd have to go back and discuss a bit further to give you a better sense on the 36 versus the 32.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Dwayne. Thanks, Chris. Our next question is from Shelley Thompson. Go ahead when you're ready, Shelley. Shelley, can you hear us? Maybe I'll just ask the question on her behalf. Her question was for Dwayne. Dwayne, what would you say was the most important aspect to getting VisitAbility to take off? Having an understanding of the costs, or having a show home for people to see?
I would say the show home was certainly a very key component because it enabled home buyers to actually physically get into a visitable home just to see what it's all about, and to see there really isn't much difference between a visitable home and compared to a non-visitable home. I mean, the most common feedback that we received is in discussion with our builders is a lot of times people aren't even aware that they're in a visitable home. what the good thing is, I think our builders do a good job now of marketing that the visitable aspect. If you go into one of our show homes, that is a visitable show home. Certainly there are brochures on VisitAbility. The marketing agents are quick to point out the benefits and all the features associated with visitable homes. And I know on the advertising side as well, we have our local newspaper does a weekly new homes section, and certainly whenever a visitable housing or visitable home is showcased, they certainly pick up on those benefits that I mentioned about visitable housing. So yeah, the show home was key.
Okay, thanks, Dwayne. Our next question is for Jason Watt and Chris Rutzert. Go ahead when you're ready.
So Jason, I'm just curious on Vancouver's new bylaws. When you mentioned that no-step entry was not mandatory for the adaptable side, were you just referring to landscaped no-step entrances or constructed ramp entries as well?
There is no requirement to have a no-step entry, and a ramp is not required either. Only the dwelling unit itself is required to be adaptable.
Was that because of some specific pushback?
Well, I don't know the whole history. I do because, as I mentioned before, I've only been with the city for about a year, but I know that there were discussions about it. It could be that Vancouver is very hilly terrain, and there's probably pushback about it, and City Council just decided not to go that far at this point. They may revisit it in the future, though.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Dwayne. Jason. We have another question for Jason from Terry Petcow. We're just going to unmute Terry and go ahead when you're ready.
Jason, yes, thank you. It's actually very similar to the last one. I was just wondering if I'm missing something. If that no-step entry is not a requirement, does it not make the balance of the requirements fairly redundant if the main floor cannot be accessible, or is this something that is there something else built into the bylaw that is addressing that?
That concern has been raised, but I think the intent is that although somebody may need help, a disabled person getting into the home, that once they're in the home that they can age in place and use the home easily once they're inside.
Okay, no, I was just curious about if I had missed something in your presentation, but that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we have another question for Dwayne from Angie Conrad. Angie, go ahead when you're ready. Okay, I'm not sure if Angie's there, but I'll ask the question on her behalf. She would like to hear more details around the specifications for the wheelchair accessible washroom, and in terms of what standards you used and what groups you consulted with or worked with in developing those standards or specifications.
Sure. So as far as the requirement that there be a wheelchair accessible washroom on the main floor, I mean the primary requirement is that there be enough room in the bathroom itself to to accommodate a 5-foot turning radius. So the result is a larger bathroom than you would see as per norm in a non-visitable house, and that's certainly one of the issues that our builders have picked up on, the fact that the larger bathroom is basically taking away space from other areas of the house. But again, it's something that was done in consultation with numerous groups. We have a disability issues office in Winnipeg where it's part of the government of Manitoba that we work closely with. There's, I mentioned in the presentation that there were numerous consultation sessions that were held, and that's where we came up with the requirement to not only have the accessible washroom on the main floor, but to have that turning radius wide enough to accommodate the wheelchair as well. I should also mention that a number of our builders have started to incorporate other features into the bathroom design, such as like a pedestal sink, for instance, making it easier for a person in a wheelchair to be able to access that sink.
Okay, thanks, Dwayne. We have a question for Clayton from Roger Gervais. Roger, go ahead when you're ready. Oh, we're just going to unmute Roger. It'll just take us 1 second. Okay, go ahead when you're ready, Roger.
Okay, Clayton, I was just wondering, I thought a number of years ago I read that your county had over 20,000 homes with VisitAbility. Is that correct? Or is that noticeably higher at this point?
Yes, it is estimated to be higher at this point. It was determined that there were more than 21,000, I believe, in 2010. We don't have a number at this point because, ultimately we would need to count every new house that was built, which wouldn't be that difficult, but we need to consolidate that between Pima County and City of Tucson. Pima County's had the ordinance longer, but currently the estimate is that there are more than 25,000 that have been built since the ordinance was adopted.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next question will be from Patricia McDonald. She indicated her mic isn't working, so we'll ask the question on her behalf. It's a question for Clayton regarding the exemptions for the builders. What proportion of builders apply for the exemption, and what proportion of applications for exemptions are approved or rejected, and are there fees associated with the process of applying for an exemption?
Okay, I'll actually answer the question backwards. The fee is based on the appeal. So a standard appeal to the building official is just under $150, and that's straight across the board for any appeal that you wish to file. So that would apply, and ultimately that's just to have the audience with the building official to determine it. As far as how many people apply, it's a relatively small number. I know that we gave one last year, but there's not a tremendous amount of people asking for them. Typically what we see is homes that are in an elevated status, such as a floodplain or something like that, and the only option the builder has is to construct a ramp that is really, really long. And just completely changes the aesthetics of the home. And in that case, it's approved. We have denied a few applications, but typically it's because there's no justification. Again, the builder says, well, I just don't want to comply, and unfortunately that isn't a justified reason. But the application numbers are low. Most of them are approved.
Thanks, Clayton. And we have a question from, a couple more questions from Chris Rutzart. Chris, go ahead when you're ready.
Hey, Dwayne, I just had a couple more quick questions. I guess the first one had already been addressed, though, was just in regards to affordable housing in the Bridgewater area, which you'd spoke to earlier. But my other question was, you mentioned earlier that Manitoba Housing is renovating its own stock, and the idea behind that is to have 10% of its units as accessible. So just for clarity, are these being renovated to be full mobility suites or visitable suites?
Yeah, I'll have to confer with that number, but my sense it's a combination of both. I think it's a requirement of 10% accessible and visible. So I don't have the breakdown of how many of those would be accessible versus visitable, but I do know that anytime we're undertaking a major renovation to one of our own buildings now, we're requiring that 10% requirement. But that's something that I can commit to getting back to that. If I get your your contact information offline.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Sure.
Okay, we had another question from Roger Gervais. Go ahead when you're ready, Roger. Oh, wait, we're just on muting you. Sorry about that. Okay, go ahead, Roger.
Hi. So this question goes to all the panelists. There's obviously a concern about the main floor washroom. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback here. So for the builders, so why not promote a wet room that would incorporate a roll-in shower that would form part of the 5-foot turning radius? Sort of as an example for that, I've heard that some of the fancier mobile homes have these wet rooms. And of course, in a mobile home, the rooms are much smaller. So why not go to that approach where, if square footage is a concern, to drop down the size of the bathroom by incorporating the square footage of a roll-in shower as part of the turning radius?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Roger. Who would like to tackle that one first?
I can discuss it first. Hello?
Yeah, go
yes,
ahead.
Jason Watt with the city. Because of the number of complaints we were having about the larger size of the washroom on the main floor, we are developing sort of a roll-in shower washroom concept, which I guess the entire bathroom could be used as a shower. In other words, it would be a drain in the middle, and there would be some faucets for the future installation of a shower. So that is one thing that we're considering right now.
So from the City of Tucson standpoint, we don't enforce the turning radius requirements. So, you know, if someone wanted to be more creative as far as where that turning radius is located and so forth, we would already be open to the concept. We're far more concerned when the ordinance was adopted that a wheelchair is actually capable of passing through the door, so that a person could get close to the water closet or to the shower and so forth, rather than having to get from outside of the room to those fixtures, rather than being able to fully maneuver inside the bathrooms like a fully accessible restroom would require.
Okay, did anyone else
Dwayne,
have anything to add? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dwayne.
Yeah, that's all right, Alan. I was just going to say, yeah, certainly the larger bathroom size was something that was flagged initially by our builders from a design consideration perspective. But I think now that we're a few years in, certainly it's become less of an issue, at least based on the feedback that I've been getting. But we're always open to looking at other potential design options, but as long as they're consistent with the current requirements.
Okay, thanks, Dwayne. We also had a few questions from attendees from when they registered. One of the questions we got was, how do you sell the benefits to policymakers and developers when the costs are upfront costs, but the benefits are more longer term? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
This is Clayton. I'd be happy to make a response to that. The cost is a highly debated issue, and we haven't had any concrete numbers come back. Whenever numbers from the analysts from the builder standpoint were given to us, they were in the thousands of dollars. When the county or the city hired analysts to try and honestly determine it, it was in the hundreds of dollars. But no one has actually come back with a determination of what that actual cost is. And that's probably mostly because the way the Inclusive Home Design Ordinance was adopted was to try and be as low of a cost modification as possible. It's more of a design issue and a planning. If you prepare the building up front for these elements, then really the only cost associated to the builder is the labor in installing the blocking in the bathrooms. So the cost the cost issue has really decreased, especially over time in our region. But the benefits to the community, I think that's really what got the ordinance adopted in the first place. It was a matter of connecting with the community on a personal level and suggesting that, you know, anyone can be affected by these issues, and that no one buys a home with the anticipation of being in a wheelchair in 10 or 15 years or something of that nature. Most of this stuff happens, you know, without anticipation. So it affects everyone.
Okay, thank you. Just going through our list of questions here. A question for the three panelists. Has your jurisdiction done any studies on costs associated with VisitAbility for both new homes and renovations in general? Was that something you undertook prior to undertaking your VisitAbility initiatives?
It's Jason. Apparently in the development of new building bylaw, there was a cost analysis done. However, that was before my time, so I'm not really sure what numbers came about from the adaptable housing requirements.
Okay.
I know we've had a few developers say that some of these things are going to be fairly costly, but what the actual numbers are, I can't really say at this point.
And it's Dwayne here. I can comment that that we did undertake a cost estimate summary in 2007. This was just right around the time when Bridgewater was just getting started, and it was more specific to the Bridgewater neighborhood. The cost estimate involved a local landscape architecture firm looking at a few typical floor plans that would you know, that would be constructed in Bridgewater, and you know, coming up with some cost estimates based on those designs. And you know, we're similar to other experiences where we're seeing a lot of cost variation as far as visitable housing. I mean, really what that report showed was that, you know, a lot of the builders, or majority of the builders, are already constructing homes with the wider doorways and hallways, and you know, the biggest challenge was the no-step entrance, and you know, that's why we made a decision that when we were going 50% visitable, that we would pre-engineer our lots to better accommodate that no-step entrance, you know, for our builders.
Thanks, Dwayne.
The City of Tucson and Pima County both hired third-party analysts to determine the costs associated. One of those came in just under $200. The other one was slightly over $500. And then multiple analysts were retained from private industry, contractors and builders, and those estimates ranged between $1,000 and $2,500.
Okay, thank you. If anyone has any more questions, please indicate them now in the question box. We had one other question. What approach do you suggest when the National Building Code exempts homes from barrier-free design requirements? We're talking about private housing stock. So any advice to policymakers on that front? Dwayne, do you have a response to that?
So can you
Could you ask the question again?
Oh, okay, sure. What approach would you suggest to policymakers when things like national building codes exempt private homes from barrier-free design requirements?
This is Clayton. I can speak up on that. It would really depend on the municipality. For the City of Tucson or Pima County, if a national code such as the International Building Code or something of that nature exempted a requirement that we adopted as a community, then we would most likely amend that out of the building code. But when we get ready to adopt a national code through mayor and council process, they get to review all of that stuff. And so at that time, then mayor and council would then be back to trying to decide whether or not they want to maintain the ordinance that has been in place. It's my strong belief that through the feedback and information that we have so forth, that the ordinance is working, that it's successful here in our region, it would most likely stay, and any exemption found in a national code would actually wind up being amended out of the code before it was adopted.
Any other?
Yes, and here in Vancouver we have our own bylaw that's based on the national code, but we have our own unique to Vancouver provisions that we can put in as we see fit for Vancouver. As far as at the national level, that would have to go through public consultation, and they would do, I guess, a cost analysis and that sort of thing to decide whether or not they're going to make the change at the national level.
Okay. Any other responses to that question? Okay. We don't have any other questions, so we'll just wrap up the webinar for now. Oh wait, I think we have a one final question. Sorry about that. Chris Rutzer, go ahead when you're ready. Sorry, Chris.
Hi guys, sorry, no worries. Just one last quick question, I guess, for all the panelists. I'm more familiar with the Manitoba side, but maybe if you could all just speak to the question. With all of the requirements being presented in your guys' region, is there any literature also being released just on suggestions to kind of promote public education on these different features that can be, promoting accessibility?
Well, here in Vancouver, we developed a pamphlet, and we've been giving a number of presentations to industry just to make them aware of the new requirements that will be coming into effect January the 1st, 2015.
For Tucson and Pima County, there was quite a bit of information that was made available during the first few years that the ordinance was adopted. It's been a number of years since Pima County adopted the ordinance, and it's I think it's mostly widely accepted and understood. We just really don't have too many questions coming in about how to meet the ordinance. So we don't currently have information. We did, but I think we're kind of past a certain threshold of understanding.
Yeah, and
that's good
in Manitoba, similar. We provided our builders certainly with pamphlets and brochures and tried to provide them with as much information as possible on visitable housing, so they could use that as a marketing tool for their customers inside the show homes. And from what I understand, a lot of our builders now are starting to develop some of their own materials as well, so which is good to see.
Great, thanks guys.
Okay, thanks everyone for participating in our webinar today. Special thank you to our three panelists. I think they provided us with a lot of great information. And if the panelists don't mind, we will share their presentations with the people who attended the webinar today. Just a reminder, if you would like to receive those presentations, please ensure you fill out your feedback survey. And there is a question on there as to whether you would like to receive the copy of the presentations. For more information about visitable housing, you can visit our website, visitablehousingcanada.com, or our Facebook page, Support Visitable Housing in Canada. Thank you everyone for attending today, and have a great day.
Thank you.